up with the title of How Sports Solves All the World's Problems, right? I mean, we're here at the Aspen Ideas Festival where people are talking about some very big topics, politics, technology, international relations or otherwise. So it's almost a deliberately provocative title, but you know what? We're going to make it stick because I am with a group of folks who understand in their bones what the value of sports in our society, how it can build the good society, which is at the core of the Aspen Institute ideal, which also respects, you know, the concept of mind, body, and spirit. So, you know, what I'd like to do is help make that argument stick immediately here. What we're talking about, and you guys can't see this the slide here, but this is an infographic that basically aggregates the stacks and stacks of research on sport and what it can do for a child who is physically active and has a sustained experience. And as you can see, sport, a kid who plays sports is 1/10 as likely to be obese. They're more likely to stay in school, in high school. They're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to come out of college and get a good job. And when they come out, they have lower health care costs. They're more likely to be active parents. They have lower rates of chronic diseases. And because they're more active parents, they're role models for their kids. So they're twice as likely to have active kids. So this incredibly virtuous cycle can be engaged if we can simply get every kid off the couch and, you know, into the game without running them into the ground, which is a problem we are facing in sports, youth sports today as well. And it goes beyond that infographic really only touches on some of the benefits. We do know that, you know, sports can be valuable in promoting race relations, mental health, medical costs for society broadly. It can teach skills like resilience and you know, teamwork. It can be useful in just bringing communities together. So we're going to explore that with just this incredible panel of folks who are with me. To my left is Ed Stack, who is the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. You know, Dick started with, what, 2 stores in upstate New York, and now there are 800 around the country. Yes. And you know, at a time when the sporting goods industry, a lot of retailers have you know, shut down their operations. Dick's continues to thrive in this environment, and more to the point, Ed is, and you can talk about it a little bit later, has really been an advocate for getting and keeping kids active through sports. To his left is Kerry Champion, who is my former colleague at ESPN. She is host of ESPN Sports Center and former host of Sports Nation and First Take. She's covered network news, sports stories, and entertainment for CBS, NBC, ABC. Her Brown Girls Dream Foundation provides mentorship for young women. She went to UCLA and is from Pasadena originally.
Any UCLA fans in the house? No? Not, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Lamar went to USC.
He went to USC, so we have this issue going.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Fight on. What?
Do we need to separate you two?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So DeMar DeRozan is you know, with the San Antonio Spurs, formerly with the Toronto Raptors. He is a 4-time NBA All-Star and a 2-time All-NBA member. Gold medals with the U.S. men's national team and the 2016 Summer Olympics. He is a spokesman for the Lupus Canada autoimmune disease as his mother was diagnosed, and has been open about his struggles with depression and the importance of mental health, which has also been a cause that Kevin has spoken very honestly and openly about. Kevin is a pro basketball player as well with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He is, Cleveland? There we go. There you go. Bring it home. Won a gold medal with the U.S. national team. He also went to UCLA and is actually the first athlete to tweet about my book that I wrote 10 years ago. So he's all good in my book. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. So here's how I want this session to go. I want this to be about more than talk. I want to anchor this thing in the idea that sport is really useful to our society in addressing a lot of these larger problems. But I want to get there methodically. And so the first thing I would like to do is, actually I'd like to establish a little bit of credibility with you folks. So you don't think we're naive and we don't understand that sport doesn't always produce great outcomes. Sometimes sport does push not so great things into the universe. We've seen that with, for instance, the USA gymnastics scandal, where a lot of girls were harmed under the idea of pursuing medals. People disregarded the needs of children. Sport is a neutral institution. If it's done well, it can be incredibly catalytic. If it's not done well, it could be harmful. So we recognize that. Just to show that we understand that sport is that, is that neutral institution. Anything come to mind that strikes you as, maybe I wish sport didn't push that into the universe?
I think insecurities, the letdown of the beginning stages of any sport that you try to jump into, it's extremely hard. And the letdown of it, if you're not fully prepared or you don't have that full confidence in yourself, it could definitely knock you down and make you feel worse about yourself with everything else, like, I can't do this. The negative thoughts start to run through your mind a little bit more. So, that's one thing that sports definitely teach you early on. And if you could push through that part of it, I think it's definitely you're making progress for sure. But it do bring insecurities early on for sure.
Which speaks to the need for quality coaches to help you work through that process.
Yeah, I think great mentors is it's very huge, especially. And it doesn't matter, it really transcends, it doesn't matter where you grow up. I think it's very key, whether it be a family member, whether it be a coach, even an older sibling that you look up to. I think it's vital to have somebody that teaches you about these insecurities and teaches you about life, really at an early age. And so much of that, there's so many good things that can come through, and so many good teaching lessons that can come through sport. And I was fortunate to have a father who played in the NBA, and somebody who was really good at teaching me about life early on in basketball and how that was going to translate into the classroom and vice versa, as well as what to look for later on in life. And I think a lot of people aren't necessarily subject to those great mentors, but if you just continue to really chase the sport that you love and see the good in it, I think that those people will find you in a very good way.
Gotcha.
I like the idea of, and being the only woman on the panel, I have to talk about just the idea of women being more involved in sports and keeping and you and I talked about this, how I feel it's very imperative that when young girls get to a certain age, they usually decide that they don't want to do it because there's not that next level where they could go pro and they can't make hundreds of millions of dollars. But the importance of sports for young women is always defined by how they socialize in terms of what they do when they get older. I see so many CEOs that run companies and they were women. If they're women, they played sports. It's just this problem-solving skill set that you have. You approach life differently. I think it is important to know that there is this disparity, and women do feel that when they try to go pro, but it is so much more important in terms of how you'll be able to socialize and go on to be successful in other aspects of your life.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
What we feel, sports are so important to these young kids' lives, and whether they are able to kind of go to reach the success that you guys have or not, it's really important for these kids, whether it's after school, to have a place to go, to have a place where they belong, to have a place where they feel accepted, and where they have those mentorships of those coaches. It's extremely important to these young people, and we all know that if after school you don't have a place to go where you have that mentorship and you have that feeling of belonging, you can end up in a lot of bad places. And I think sports serves as a place for these kids to go.
So let's talk about the personal here, Ed. I mean, how did playing sports as a child shape your life and perhaps even the skills that you use in running a significant company?
Well, I played sports my whole life. I was hoping I would be better than I was, and but as you go through this, and you learn teamwork, you learn all the things that you would think, and you learn teamwork, you learn commitment. You need to be in practice on time. You need to pull your weight. You need to kind of lift up your friends when they're having a difficult time, and all those are all things that you learn about, and you can take into business also. And it was at one point that I realized that, I mean, when I grew up, I wanted to play quarterback for the Giants. You didn't draft me. I wanted to, as I was a kid, I wanted to play quarterback for the Giants, or I wanted to catch for the Yankees. And there was a defining moment that when I was playing high school baseball, I realized that was never going to happen. And as I was kind of disappointed about that, but as I thought about it, I thought, that's fine. The experience I had through sports and the friends I made and the things I learned was all worth it, even if I'm sitting here in this role as opposed to sitting in the role that you guys are in.
I wrote about this in my book. I interviewed Jack Welch, who ran GE for many years, and he actually, the meeting space at GE was called the Sand Pit, because it was a reference to his growing up in Salem, Massachusetts, where it was him working through the playground politics, him and his buddies solving problems on their own rather than adults doing that. Does that resonate with you at all?
Sure. I mean, when I played sports, we back then you had to go pick up your own games. It wasn't you had to be a little more innovative in finding the ability to play than kids today, where everything is so structured. But I do know that if I hadn't had the sports that I played through high school, if I didn't have those to go to after school, I suspect I wouldn't be where I am right now, and I would have gotten into a lot of trouble as a kid.
What about you, Kerry?
Well, I think that for me, I agree. I wasn't that great so that's why I'm an anchor. I'm not a professional of anything, any type of sports. But we talked about why I believe sports can change lives. I grew up in a single-parent household, so it was just my mom, and it was very difficult for her to take me to certain after-school programs. And so what I relied on a lot was the community that was around me, people who could help take me to and fro, and that changed my life. While I knew that I probably wouldn't play on the collegiate level or past that, I knew that I was learning a skill set that would really change my life, and the people that I met changed my life. So for me, sports has been more about how I've been able to define my lifestyle, and that's why I do what I do. I'm able to tell stories, great stories, DeMar's story, Kevin's story. These are great stories, and for me, that's been life-changing.
Yep. What do you, DeMar? How has sport impacted you personally? Not just as an athlete, but like built you as a human being?
Starting off as a kid, sports gave me my imagination. Being a kid, watching all these great athletes and try to recreate the moments, whether it's outside in the backyard, go to a park, you want to do something you seen Jordan do. It gave me that motivation to want to get into that sport. It gave me that drive to want to be an athlete, and it all started as a child. I remember watching Space Jam and wanted to be in the Space Jam movie, so.
They're doing another one.
Yeah, I'm not in it though.
My
But
bad.
it gave me
Sorry.
my imagination, and as a child, when you have an imagination and you could have the belief in your imagination, that'll take you far. And even to this day, playing in the league, I still think back to the moments when I was a child of that imagination that I have. Now I'm in that moment. So to be able to do that is awesome, and it all came from sports.
It sounds like it's hopeful too. Like it
Yeah,
gives
yeah,
everybody
definitely,
hope.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely. Sports was one thing, especially me growing up in Compton, California. You had to lean on something that gave you some type of hope, and sports did that. And to me, that was my only way out. That I had no other option. Was I need to be this. Whatever I believe in my mind, I need to be this because this is my only way out. So, yeah, sports did that for me.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think DeMar hit on the head. It's that inspiration, as well as just that. It just gives you a whole sense of a level of growth. I think you're so susceptible to change at that age, and you can dream to be whoever you want to be. And sports is such an unbelievable gateway to success, and has so many teaching points. Where I was actually, I didn't watch too much of it because Shaq got on the mic last night and did a freestyle for the NBA awards, so it was a complete disaster. But if you look, like, so it's like it doesn't matter where you're from. Like I came from a kind of an upper middle class area, and then you look at DeMar, who came from Compton, California. Like we're both kids with a similar dream. You look at Pascal Siakam last night, who plays for Toronto. He grew up in the Cameroon, and he talked about last night, like I was that kid in Africa. I was that kid in Cameroon that just wanted to make it to the NBA, to inspire kids from where I'm from and all around the world. You had the Rookie of the Year, Luka Doncic, who's from Slovenia, grew up there. And then you have the MVP and Giannis Antetokounmpo, who, see how I did that?
Mm-hmm.
You did it. That was smooth too. That was smooth.
Who won the MVP. So the from all over the world, I think sports has such a global impact, and I can speak specifically about our game. It has such a global impact and give kids such hope and such that imagination that you and Kerry had talked about, where it just becomes a gateway to greater things. And I know I'm getting a little off topic here and going left field, but you've seen guys like, whether it's DeMar or myself, whether it's LeBron James starting his own school. We're talking about mental health. The NBA, I think sports in general now, whether it's the Me Too movement, the women's movement, Black Lives Matter, like we were able to, through sports, speak about such important and tough concepts and topics that make us more than an athlete. And I think that is what where a lot of the good comes from in sport. And as a kid, you're not only looking up to somebody now, you're not only looking up to a DeMar DeRozan thinking, man, I want to be like him, I want to dunk like him, I want to go to the absolute height of the game, be all NBA, I'm gonna stop because he's really fucking good.
You selling me right now.
No, but they're also looking like, I want to be also bigger than basketball. So I want to focus on my relationships. I want to focus on my school. I want to focus on my coaches, whatever it is, so that I can elicit change in a very positive way when it comes to my community and even on a larger scale. So I think the reason why we're here is talking about sports in a very positive light and how we can change the world. And just from my perspective, from what I've seen, there can be a lot of good generated through this, and it transcends any walk of life or where you're from. So it's just a real special thing, and it's refreshing to even sit here and be talking about with everybody. So
Kevin's right. Like the athletes this generation of athletes that I'm watching us cover, I'm sorry to jump in, but I'm telling you, they have changed the game in so many ways in terms of using their platform for what they really care about. There used to be, athletes of yesteryear would have this image of, I just want to make money, I just want to, get in and I want to get out, and they didn't feel an obligation to a cause, or they didn't feel as if maybe they could even speak on certain issues. And as I watch now, I'm just so amazed by what I see. He talked about what LeBron James does, right? So he's creating a legacy. It's no more chasing Jordan. It is about what I want to do off the court. That's really truly what my legacy will be. He's even said, if I could be more like Muhammad Ali in the sense to create change and have a conversation, that's great. DeMar's doing that, being honest, talking about depression. He could go somewhere. Depression relates to anybody. You don't have to have a basketball skill set. You don't have to be from Compton. You could be walking down the street in the greatest of neighborhoods, and someone who doesn't look like you or didn't come from your background can walk up to you and say, you really, truly inspire me because of your platform and then what you've tried to do to talk about what your own issues are. I can relate to that more than anything, because everybody can't dunk. Can you dunk or no?
I can't.
Okay.
I'm sure that's a big surprise.
I cannot either.
Ed, I can find you an 8-foot hoop if that's going to help.
But everybody
That would
can
help.
relate to a mental issue, a family member with it. They might have it. Life isn't easy, and to have someone who has so much success and so much, I'm referring to these athletes, to have so many resources, be able to be honest about their lifestyles and using their platforms for a purpose, it's just really something amazing, and we haven't seen it before in a long way.
Yeah. How much better are communities where kids have broad access to sport, right? So places where people can come together and share an experience, places where people can learn about each other, learn about strangers, places where people from different political backgrounds can find common cause. I sometimes worry about what our society might be if sport wasn't there as a glue. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. I've met people from all walks of life through sports. met people, have a great relationship with people, been to places that I never thought I'd ever be, all from sports. Sports brings everyone together. I think without sports, we'd definitely be divided in a much more way we could imagine. Sports we all could relate to at some point of our life. It don't got to be basketball. It could be golf, whatever it is. I find enjoyment in all sports because you see how it brings people together. I love watching boxing fans, their reactions to a boxing match. I love watching the golf fans that stand out there quiet for 18 holes, but enjoy it. It's like to bring different walks of life out through sports in so many ways is incredible, and I think it's nothing else out there that's like sports that could bring us together. So
I think it does bring communities together, and the thing that we're concerned about is that what's happening with the funding cuts in the public school system, that by 2021, 2022, somewhere around there, you could have 27% of the public high schools without a sports program. And if you think about that, that's catastrophic for our kids. And where they're losing these programs the fastest is where they probably need them the most. And if you think about bringing communities together, whether it's a Friday night basketball game, a Friday night football game, it doesn't matter what your race is, what your religion is, what your job is. If you're cheering for that school, you're cheering for that school. And without that, I think we're going to lose a lot of community involvement and community togetherness as these school programs start to continue to evaporate.
Yeah, you raise a good point, because about 2/3 our data shows. I'll step back here. We've got something called Project Play, which is the signature initiative of the Sports and Society program. It's all about building healthier communities through sports, starting with universal access to a quality experience for kids. So to create that conversation, we have to have good data. And so we collect this on an annual basis. And one of the things we've learned is that kids from upper income homes are about 68, 69% of them play sports. In lower income homes, low income homes, it's more like 34, 35%. And that gap is growing. So we have sort of separated into this nation of sport haves and have-nots, depending on whether you have access to that club team, which costs a lot of money at a very early age, which can lead to the high school roster spots and the playing time. It's fascinating how much things have changed in just a generation, but they changed most dramatically in lower income communities, places like where you grew up, Damar. So when you hear numbers like that and what Ed just talked about, what runs through your mind about access to sport for kids in places like Compton?
For me, like you said, that's something that needs to be more of a necessity, because you're taking away opportunities for these kids to come together, learn, want to have more of a drive to want to make it out. You take those elements away, you diverting off to doing something that's not so good, and that's not fair to these kids. For me, growing up, it was rough. If it wasn't for basketball, I have no clue where I'd be, and we can't take that away from these kids. And just the thought of that is sad, because you should see it. Look, everybody loves sports. Everybody loves sports, and to see the enjoyment that it brings kids, give them something to look forward to. Like, I used to love when school was out just so I could go play basketball. Like, I look forward to just getting through school so I could go play, or see a friend, or seeing a friend that I met yesterday, being able to see him at the gym the next day. Things like that goes a long way for these kids. So something like that to be going on is definitely catastrophic, and I even hate the thought of it.
It's a real problem when you think about these schools that are. We did a movie called We Could Be King about the doomsday budget in Philadelphia, where so many schools were closed and sports programs and other extracurricular activities were gone. And when you think about it, they closed schools, put 2 schools together, 3 schools together into one. You put 2 schools into one school. Now you have half the amount of teams. You have half the amount of kids that can play. And when we did this movie, we actually were able to film a Board of Education meeting, which I was shocked that they let us go in and do that. And there was a really profound moment that one of the students, we filmed this football team, and one of the students who was a former football player on that team said, "No football? I'm not going to school." And if you think about that, what that means to the fabric of the country 5, 10, 15 years from now, in these lower income areas that these sports programs are being cut, that these kids decide not to go to school, we can't get to a good place. This is such an important issue, and we're really not talking about it, and we're not doing enough about it.
You know, and we have Title IX, which has been a great thing for girls in general and women since the early 1970s. But girls in lower income communities have not benefited as much. There's high dropout rates, as you know, Kerry, among girls, urban girls and rural girls, less so with suburban girls. So how do we flip that around? Any ideas on how to make sure that girls stay involved in sports who've been introduced to them at earlier ages?
I think there are a couple of layers here. In terms of when you say urban communities or rural communities and they're dropping out, well, they have other responsibilities, right? So if you have to watch your little brother, you can't play sports. If you have to work because your mom is the only person that's working and you need to help out, you can't play sports. I had my first job when I was 12 in the summer. I know that there are people who legitimately have to contribute when they get to a certain age, which prevents them from being able to participate in sports. But there's also this lack of interest because they don't know, and I mentioned this earlier, where they're going to take it. If it can't be received on a level that is what the NBA would be or the NFL would be. I see an NFL coach in the room right here, Katie Sowers, shout out to my girl, and her sister. And we talked about how, some of these sports aren't particularly glorified, and you do it for the love of the game, and maybe you get paid, I don't know what she told me when she was $12 for a game. You can't really tell a young girl to stay active if she can't really see beyond what it does, if she is only interested in sports. But here's the deal. In terms of what I think there's a huge obligation on informing these parents, because sports is education. If I'm playing sports and I'm doing it at any level that's significant, I can go to any college I can get a partial scholarship, I can get a full ride, and then that opens the door to something else. If we can emphasize the aspect of what it does, if you continue to stay and play and then take it to the next level, the collegiate level, you may not go pro, but there's a free education waiting for you. There's a world of opportunity waiting for you. You could use your influence to change how it's being received. So I think the emphasis should be on making sure that parents, especially of these young girls, really understand that it is significant. And if you can get somebody to perhaps help that young child, and she doesn't have to work part-time, you could see her future change if she is able to stay in sports and use that to go on to college. It really is a game changer for so many people.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Now, parents in upper income communities like you grew up in, Kevin, it's a little bit of a different challenge, right? I mean, kids are often being fed sports with a fire hose. Yes. And they're being asked to specialize really early, and there seems to be a lot of pressure on kids at an early age. How do we flip that around, and how do we get parents to see the big picture?
Well, I think it's tough. It's funny. My girlfriend Kate is right here. We just started watching. Anybody watch Big Little Lies? So you have these helicopter parents who believe that it's their kid and only their kid that matters. And I'm just talking about school. It's the same thing in sports as well. I came from a place where, and you've all seen it before, politics, and we have a common term called the AAU dad, who's so heavily involved that he takes away the love from or for the game from the kid, and that's happening and trending in a way that's happening at such an earlier age now. I mean, you're having, what were we talking about yesterday where they're now having second grade national championships?
Yeah, AAU's second grade national championships.
Yeah, these kids, you're starting to get scouted, in fourth, fifth, sixth grade now, and it's what you're asking of these kids is very, very tough, and I think you're creating a sense of burnout. I can remember LeBron talking about his oldest son, LeBron Jr., and he was saying, I'm not even going to touch his game until he's in high school. If he comes to me and asks me, fine. I'll work with him. I'll teach him little minor things, but he has to learn about failure. He has to learn about communication and adversity and overcoming certain obstacles, or he's not going to make it to where he wants to be. And I imagine with Bronny and Bryce, both of his kids, or his sons, they all have aspirations of making it to the NBA. So, I also had a father that it came time about 7th, 8th grade. That was about the cutoff for me. I also played baseball, and he said, okay, Kevin, you're going to be 6'9". What are we doing? We're not playing baseball. Your strike zone's too damn big. You're not left-handed. You're not going to be a pitcher. I'm like, okay, Dad, thanks for telling me I'm not going to be. But he said, you're going to be in the NBA. But he taught me a lot early on, and I came from like you said, a place where we did have the means to to be a part of every team. The schooling was great, but you still had the politics that were very created a sense of, poison, if you will, around these kids. And I think when you have to find a good balance. I think good balance in everything. I think that's probably the toughest thing to do in life in general. But when it comes to sports, you got to allow your kids to fail. You got to allow them to figure it out on their own, or else they're going to be, it's really going to hold them up. And I think for me, just being able to go out there and have a sense of freedom and playing my game and learning and kind of what DeMar was talking about, just having that sense of trying new things and being inspired in that way is super beneficial. So I think it's imperative that we allow our kids to have some failures and have that adversity and not always be so involved in everything they're doing. I'm not saying not be involved at all, because you have to be a parent, you have to push them in the right direction, but in a lot of cases they have to go out there and make some decisions for themselves, and that's a way that they're going to learn.
I think, even speaking on that, I have 2 daughters that would never understand how their father grew up. So I don't force nothing upon them. Whatever they want to do, I'm all for it. I support them. My oldest daughter loved basketball just for growing up watching me play basketball. So I told myself I wasn't going to force basketball upon her. She came to me and said she wanted to play basketball. 2 weeks later, she wanted to do something else. 2 weeks later, she wanted to do something else. So for me, it's whatever she want to do. I'm there to support her. And it just makes me happy that she's coming to me saying, I want to try this, I want to try this. Then her youngest sister get a chance just to watch everything she do. So, the beauty of that, of being a father for me, is just telling my kids I'm there to support them. If you got a question or you need help with anything, I'm the coolest dad in the world. You can come ask me. But I never, get down on my kids for trying something, because they got to go through the whole process, Yeah. So Kevin made a great point about that. And me being in the shoes I am to have kids that are privileged, I would never want to put that extra pressure on them, So I think I got a cool little situation going on.
So you actually touched on the point. I flipped to the next slide here. Within our program, there's no Ministry of Sports in this country to coordinate sport activity. And so we sort of stepped up to convene all the brightest minds, the right people, to develop a framework to get and keep kids active through sports. It's this document you see, Sport for All, Play for Life, a playbook to get every kid in the game. And the first play is one that touches on what you talked about, DeMar, which is ask kids what they want, giving them a voice in their experience, as opposed to it all being about the adults pursuing their dreams. There are 8 other strategies for the 8 sectors that touch the lives of kids or otherwise. So I want to kind of turn this conversation to big ideas, right? So if only 1/3 of kids from lower income communities are playing sports even one day a year, and 2/3 of kids in upper income homes, which is still a third who are not in the game at all, are playing, and only 37% are playing on a regular basis any team sport, ages 6 to 12. How do we introduce big ideas, systems level changes that are going to move those numbers at the national level? I wrote in the New York Times about a month ago about what they do in Norway, which I think has the most effective sports system in the world. 93% of kids play sports in that country. They have a couple features in place. One is a children's rights in sport document. It says every kid in this country deserves a quality sport experience, which means they get good coaches, means they have a voice in the design of the programming. If the kid wants to transfer clubs in the middle of the season, no problem, no penalty. You can suit up, shifts the power to the kids instead of the coaches. It's all about age-appropriate play. It's not about trying to sort the weak from the strong at age 8 or 10 or 12. They create this like protected zone up through 12 based upon physical literacy and otherwise. And once they get into the teenage years, then they load them up all the professional, coaches and ideas, and they kill it. A nation of 5 million people won more Olympic medals than any nation in the history of the Winter Games last year, 39. We finished 4th, a nation of 330 million people. So they're doing something right over there. The second thing they do is they fund their sports system. How do they get it funded? It's sports, it's gambling, including sports betting. It's legal over there. They take a set of the proceeds from legalized sports gambling and then push it into the sports system, which funds everything from the Olympic development and so forth. But most of the money goes right back into communities, from matching grants to build facilities for their version of a Boys and Girls Club or otherwise. And they insist that those facilities be accessible to kids of every ability, kids from Special Olympics or who have adaptive needs, or kids of lower ability or otherwise. So there's sort of a carrot there. There's a funding mechanism and a way to create some adherence to best practices. I mean, I came away blown away in my inboxes. I get another 10 emails a day from people who are like, how do we bring this to the US? So I throw that in there just to kind of seed this conversation. But let me start with you, Ed. If we're going to move those national KPI of kids who are playing sports and playing sports on a regular basis, what big ideas, what systems level interventions should we be thinking about?
Well, I think there's some systemic issues that need to be dealt with, but I think it needs to become a priority, and it's not. There's so many competing priorities in the country today, and one of the things that we've talked about in our business, we've always been about kids, and whether it's around sports or whether it's about the firearms decisions that we've made, it's always been around sports. And we've always felt that, I've always indicated that I think our country's most precious natural resource are our kids. And we don't spend enough time with them, we don't spend enough money on them, we don't spend enough resources on them. And until we get very serious about making this a national debate, we're not going to get there. There's funding crises about this. We had our Sports Matter Foundation, we had a dinner after a movie that we produced a while back, and we had a number of terrific people on the panel. And Tim Fincham, who was the commissioner of the PGA at the time, said, this was in 2016, he said, why aren't we talking about this crisis in the presidential debates?
Right.
And until we get this at a national or state level and get really serious about this, we can come up with a lot of great ideas. We've got to get serious about this. We've got to I love the idea of a ministry of sport. But then how do we fund it? And then how do we get this to these kids? Because these kids are drowning, especially in the inner city. They've got no place to go. They've got nothing to do. And we have to educate and take care of all of our kids. And so I think we've got to find a way to make this really on the national debate, and we need to find a way to fund this. And I think the sports gambling might be one way to start, but I don't think it's the final end-all, be-all. We need a lot more money than that.
I definitely agree. I was going to say we don't prioritize that. You speak about Norway. That's a priority, obviously, in that country. The leaders there have made it a priority, so it's been institutionalized, and so we don't have that. So I'm sure on local levels people are trying to do that, but it's a congressional issue, and it has to be taken to our leaders who actually have a voice, who can do it, and that's not a priority. I don't even know how, you can get some people on board, but how do you get them all on board? You're right. It should be a conversation in our presidential national debates. Like, this is a big issue. We rarely talk about our kids. We rarely talk about the problems in sports and how, as you say, this panel is, sports can solve the world's problems. It doesn't seem to be a priority. And I don't want to get too political, but there are so many other priorities in this country that will always supersede, if you will, these issues. So we can talk all day. How to institute is the real issue.
Any ideas, guys? And is there, is there something more that athletes can do to raise the visibility around this issue?
I think for sure, from our part, is to speak on it. Even just us speaking on the topic, getting it out there, getting it understood, really make it a priority from our end. That definitely could move mountains by just us voicing it. So I think for us as athletes, just getting it out there, showing people the stats on what's going on, would definitely do something big.
Yeah, I think like DeMar said, it's bringing eyes to the concept of the next generation, making our kids better through sport. And it's tough to say or to give any one answer that is going to make or elicit the change that we need. As we mentioned, the gambling, which could be done through our game, because Adam Silver, he legalized betting and gambling on games. I think it was a year or two ago, if I'm not mistaken. But I think just I'm such a visual person. I'm such a visual learner. I believe that just us having that global reach, just being able to have the power that we do as athletes, and so many people living vicariously through sport, I think it's super powerful for us to have a voice in this. I know that there's public office, and I know that there's a number of big heavy hitters and movers and shakers that can make a difference. But I think as athletes, even at the ground floor, just speaking about it and making it important and having intent in what we're speaking about can be very powerful, because it's really, at the end of the day, strength in numbers for us.
All right, gotcha. Let's go to a couple of questions here. Lori. And by the way, thank you. Lori has been a supporter of Project Play in Harlem, where we've created
Okay, two quick things. First, Ed, if you would still like, I would like to invite you to a New York Giants game. And if you
Be
think,
careful, because if you invite me, I'm probably going to show up.
no, you can show up. And if you think that you're better than Eli, I promise in front of everyone to get you an interview with the coach. So
I'm not even close.
it's not over yet. So about how to get sports. So I'm very involved both in arts and sports, and there's such a parallel between the arts being cut, sports being cut, et cetera, et cetera. And about, oh my God, it's almost 20 years ago now, I was running something called the Annenberg Initiative to put the arts back into New York City public schools. There was a big article, actually 5 days in the New York Times, about how how the sports were cut from the New York City public schools. So I went to my father and I said, you can do for sports pretty much what I'm doing for the arts, or what we are. It wasn't obviously me by myself. Anyway, they started something called Take the Field. And it was a partnership with New York City Department of Ed and the city, and they built or rebuilt 45 playing fields in all through New York City with public-private matches. I'm surprised he didn't actually ask you for a match, but many corporations that were asked, many individuals. So maybe that's something that, I don't know if there are people in the room who are involved in sports, but the fields are still going. The money was raised. I think they raised $100 million, and it was a 2-to-1 match. So the city put in $200 million. Now, the question I was going to ask before that, but it's probably not the right time for that, but if anybody wanted to comment on athletes being paid in college, or if you don't want to go there, that's okay too.
No, when we do a
Absolutely
Just
be
thoughts
paid-
about
be
it. I don't
paid.
know.
Without a
mine
doubt,
are.
1,000%, 1,000% for sure.
I think everybody agrees. It's
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
have to.
You
They should
have
pay
to.
them.
I mean,
yeah.
I'll just speak. At least at the very top level. If we're going to talk about NCAA basketball, I'm going to talk about that because I know that. I take a guy like Zion Williamson. He had I forget who they're playing. They're playing North Carolina at Cameron Indoor Stadium. So there was a home game for him, and within the first few minutes, I think it might have been the first minute or two, he had what looked like a career-ending injury. He blew out of his shoe. He, had limped off the floor, and I think everybody kind of gasped. And that then even furthered the question, should these NCAA players be getting paid? He actually came back, ended up winning National Player of the Year, but these ESPNs of the world. I mean, it's true. There's these juggernauts that he wasn't getting paid, and they had a Zion cam on him.
The CBS actually had the
CBS,
Zion cam.
okay.
But yeah.
UCLA
All right, go ahead. Rest it is. But yeah, no, you're right.
So these juggernauts are in these, and it's tough for me to say because we have such a lucrative TV deal, and it's the reason we're able to have all these eyes on our sport. But for a kid like him and all these top-level athletes in the NCAA, it's really tough to see them not get paid because they are putting it all on the line. I know that they're getting a free education, but these schools are making so much money off them, using their name and likeness. you know, and they're going through so much, whether it's that year or 4 years of college, where you know, they're trying to change their families' lives and make an impact on their communities and so on and so forth. But they're not really getting compensated as they should be. But that's a whole nother can of worms when you start talking about the other. I mean, that in itself, but all the other sports as well, because like soccer, basketball, football, those are the heavy hitters when it comes to the sports. But then you have, you know, really all the others that it's tough to then say they're not getting the same, you know, cut of the pie.
But there's a way to do that, and they could figure that out. We know that basketball and football carry most of the resources and funding for the rest of the sports, but there's a way to do that. Side note, UCLA owes you money, I feel like, because you should have been paid. I'm going to have them give you money because you should have been paid.
Yeah, I'll
No?
give you about 10.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What percentage?
Well, no matter where you come down on that issue, the intersection point is this. If athletes were compensated in college, they would have more resources to potentially be assets in their own communities, right? Setting up their own foundations, funding coach training, being leaders, not always being so desperate about how am I going to feed myself. That's my very clever way of bringing it back to our topic. Is that good? Yeah. Anyway, next question. Yeah. Let's wait for the microphone.
Two quick questions. First, I did see, I think it might have been on Brian Gumbel's
Yeah, Real Sports this
Real
month.
Sport. It was fantastic. So
Thanks.
compliments to you. I have an issue with one and done in basketball versus what they're doing with football as far as, I don't know if it's 1 year, 3 years, whatever it is. And I understand about the economic gain. I have my own issues about the NCAA, which I think is deplorable, which I would not bring up right now. That's the first part. The second part is, so how do you feel about when kids are playing today, and no matter what, they'll get a trophy just for being out there? I know it goes back to what you were saying earlier, where they didn't have trophies, and they didn't, you know, you went there and how do you feel about these two issues that I brought up? Thank you.
What you mean getting trophies? But
Participation trophies. Jinx!
Well, you know,
they do that?
well, I never had that.
No, that's what I'm saying. I never.
I was going home getting a talking to if I came in second place. So
I'm out the loop on that one, but
Well,
no, I
there's
think it definitely it happens, but that's. I don't think you gain. I don't think you learn anything from that. I think it is something to, as we talked about. I mean, that was one of the first things that we had mentioned was just somebody getting out there, moving, getting into sport, what that means for their growth, you know, as a human being, and as well as their interests. I think that's key, and later in life how that impacts them. But no, I'm not really I don't think that really teaches kids anything when you get a participation trophy. I think there are teaching points, you know, in everything that they do in every game and every competition. But no, I'm just not a fan of it. When I think it's, you know, I'm a person or we're both advocates for mental health, and you know we know that there's a stigma around that. But I think it's kind of making us a little bit soft in that way, and that's not how we're as Americans too. How we don't want to raise our kids to be soft.
that's terrible. To me, that just sounds like it teaches bad habits to make you complacent. So
Well, the counter argument to that is in Norway, actually, as part of the Children's Rights in Sport document, it says that if you're going to hand out a trophy to anyone, hand out a trophy to everyone. Now, the reason they do that is, and remember, they develop the most competitive athletes in the world, okay, ultimately, on a per capita basis. The reason they do that is to send a signal to all the adults in the pipeline that it is not about, you know, win at all costs and sorting the weak from the strong before kids grow into their bodies and their minds. It's about development first. There's a time to compete like heck and go Darwinian. It's about 13 or 14. So actually in that document, they say no national championships before age 14, no regional championships before, I think, age 11. They just work really hard to create this protective zone. So when I asked them about the participation trophy thing, they're like, It's not a big deal. It's in our country, it's just not a big deal. Kids don't even like value the trophies that much, and we don't think it makes them soft. So that's the
why we
count.
have
That's
you
the
here.
counter.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the
That's why we
counter.
have you here. I mean,
Well,
I'm gonna argue that one to the day that I die. I know that this guy's
Well,
with
we
me too.
live in a competitive society, and kids need to learn how to compete, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, the challenge is when you say, well, if competition is all that matters, are we creating a scenario where we're saying, well, then let's get all the early bloomers on one team when they're 8 and 9 years old and set aside the other kids? And what are the downstream impacts of us overemphasizing not even competition, but winning at an early age? I think it's a fair question.
I think the kids to all get trophies. I'm the same way as you. I'm not a big fan of that. And in reality, every kid on that team knows who the best players are.
Right.
And they know that
Right.
they didn't deserve a trophy or, just for participating. I mean,
Right.
who are we kidding? I mean, these trophies that are be given, in my opinion, the world according to Ed Stack, which at the end of the day means absolutely nothing, the trophies are be given out for the parents.
Right.
Because I want my kid to feel better about himself, and it's really I want myself to feel better about myself, and it's not about the kids.
Yeah, competitive parenting.
Yeah, I think there's an adverse effect to it too. Like, I keep talking about teaching points, and I don't have 2 young daughters to have these teaching points or speak to them, but I just know that it would be very, I feel like, misleading in a lot of ways to. I'm not even saying that this is okay, but it's just you can't. It's not all sunshine, rainbow. It's not all happy. Like there's people are going to be subject to loss at some point in their life.
Right.
They're going to have a ton of adversity. So to give a participation trophy, that's just like putting
That
to me lipstick
doesn't
on a pig.
yeah, they don't get a lesson, and I think that what
there's
Ed
no
said is
lesson in
right.
that.
There's no lesson in that. I agree there should not be any participation trophies. What you said is that everyone knows who the best player on that team is, and so they're not fooling anybody by handing out a participation trophy. I get that in theory and what they're doing, but there's nothing wrong with healthy competition. There's nothing wrong with trying to show that you want to be better if you see someone who is the best and aspire to be better than that person. And then at the end of the day, we're putting too much on the actual sport. Kevin talks about his dad. There are people in your lives that will teach you right from wrong, healthy competition. We got to refer back to these parents. We can't leave it to the participation trophy for everybody else to understand it. I don't have kids, but I'm saying my mom's going to teach me the lesson at the end of the day. That's where I'm going to really learn, or my dad is really going to teach me the lesson at the end of the day. That's where I'm going to really learn where my values come from and where I matter and how I want to compete. It's not going to be because you gave me a participation trophy.
Yeah, I think the question is whether the child who is not winning still has an opportunity to play sports, right? So how do we create a system where competition is absolutely embedded into everything, but when you lose that game or you don't make that team, you still have a place to play?
And everybody can play. Everybody can play. That's why you have JV. Everyone can still play. It's just a matter of level what you're playing at. Are you suggesting or asking whether or not is it unfair if we put these kids in a position where they don't get to play with the best?
Well, not just with the best, just play it all. So one of the things we need to look at, I feel, is the school sports model, which is that 80 kids try out for the basketball team, 15 make it, 7 get playing time, and there are a whole bunch of kids who are just cut and they don't have a place to play. So how do we need to bring back intramurals for those kids? Do we need to create 2 or 3 teams like they do at the prep schools? They have 80 kids show up for basketball. They'll create multiple teams. So how do we create those opportunities where the greatest number of kids are exposed to competitive experiences as opposed to just the elite athletes or the early blooming athletes?
You have to.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go to another question.
Quick question. Making the NBA, you're one in a million, but many have your dreams. About maybe 1% of college players make it to the NBA, 2% of high school players make it into college. So most kids will plateau really at the high school level. It doesn't make. What message do you have to these kids who have the dreams of yours that don't have that? And they may work really hard, but there's so much more innate talent that you also have, the two of you. What message do you have to these other kids? Maybe they're able to play in college or up to the high school level, but then ability ends from there.
use your relationships that you gain through coming up high school. If you make it to college, if you don't go pro, so many great people you can meet through the process of playing basketball. You don't got to be an NBA player, you know. You can maybe go overseas. If you don't go overseas, you could be a coach, you could be a trainer, you could be an agent. There's so many elements of things that come from basketball to where you just don't have to be a basketball player. You know, and I got a lot of friends to this day that didn't make the league, but they are in high places when it comes to basketball. You know, and basketball brings that opportunity to you. You know, it's not meant for everybody to be a basketball player, but it's meant for them to be the arms of things that come from basketball, like an agent, anything. You know, so many opportunities come from it. You know, you could be a movie star extra in a basketball movie just because you got the body physique and you know the game of basketball.
Space Jam 2,
Yeah,
right?
Space Jam 2.
You
You
could
know,
be an
so,
extra. Yeah.
there's so many things that just come from basketball that you could be other than a basketball player for sure.
Well, so I want to wrap up here. I got the big 0-0, shut it down look.